So I lead on arts and culture, and what I do is I give grants, funding, and support to creatives on the continent who are pushing positive narratives about Africa. And it's exactly the same for our media department, so journalists and media organizations and publications who are being intentional about the narratives that they are creating through the stories that they're telling. So you'll see that it says Natasha Kamani on the slide because she's on media, but I live in Ghana, I'm based in Ghana, I'm a Ghanaian, so that's why I've been able to join you in person. This is going to be interactive, sorry, I'm going to ask you some questions. Who knows what ethical storytelling is? Does everyone know what ethical storytelling is? Yes, no? Do you believe that as journalists, you're all ethical storytellers? Who answered? Is that you?
Yeah.
Why? What makes you believe you're an ethical storyteller? Would you like the microphone?
What do I believe that we are all ethical storytellers?
Yeah.
Ethical.
Ethical.
Take away.
To a large extent, we are. To a large extent, we know that we are to be ethical storytellers. Except that, most of us have decided to try the other way, not to be ethical.
Why?
Yes, we just want to reach the water or the waters. I mean, try to be controversial sometimes because when we think that we want to toe the ethical line, that side is too proletariat kind of, let's use the controversial way to make the content, or let me say Ghana, to make Ghana hot a bit. People should get talking. When we all go the normal way, things go normal. So
Thank you for your honesty.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Do you acknowledge how harmful it can be to put stories out just to get people talking? So I think that's something that we're asking people to consider, right? So you want people to engage with what you're writing. And I'm a young woman, so of course we like things about entertainment, we like gossip, we like things that are politically controversial. But if all of these stories are going out in the country and furthermore in the continent and across the globe, what narrative will that eventually create about Africa? And how harmful is that narrative to Africans, not only in the diaspora, but on the continent and in the country as well? And lastly, how harmful is that to journalists and future journalists and the reputation and the narratives about them? So the importance of ethical storytelling, just one second, is that you make a conscious decision to move away from stereotypical and harmful narratives. So you actually say that even though this may sell, actually the long-term damage and effects of this story is very dangerous. And I think it's a very difficult ask to ask journalists specifically to become ethical storytellers. At the end of the day, we live in a capitalist society and everyone has to make money, right? And it's unrealistic to tell people to make that sacrifice. So I'd implore you all to consider it, but I absolutely cannot force you to do so. What I will do though is to take you through this report that Africa Knows Us did this year about how to write ethically about Africa. So if you could help me with the next slide, please. So there are questions that we say you should ask before you put out a story. You should go through these 8. Should be 8. Okay, you should go through these 7 questions. The first one is, how do you feel about the individuals that you're working with on this particular project? What are your own biases and how will they contribute to the way that you write? Do you believe that the individuals or the community are broken? And I just want to say that when we were writing this report, a lot of it wasn't actually necessarily for Africans, but for people outside of the globe that were writing about Africa and were pushing these negative narratives into the world. If you approach stories about the continent from a place of Africa is lacking and needs aid, if that's what you believe, it will reflect in your writing. That isn't true. Africa is no more broken than all the other continents. But that tends to be the prevailing narrative because those are the stories that we invite in. If anybody disagrees with me, you're welcome to raise your hand. I want this to be a conversation and I like a challenge. So have you decided the exact story that you want to tell before the project even starts? Before you write a story, how long does it take for you to actually sit down and decide you want to do it?
Okay. According to our house planning, by the time I read this book, I should get my needs and the support team.
Right.
So when I get to the office, it will take me around less than 1 month to do it because we are doing it time.
Right.
We supply meetings a number of media houses. So we have to make sure that we see them at the right time.
Thank you. So, and I'm going to ask one other person. Evan. So how long does it take you to write before you decide you want to put a story out?
Different perspective.
Okay.
So most of the times, the writing really do not take that much time. If the research is right or the points that I want to come from in terms of writing is right, I can just use about 2 days, depending on the duration of the script just completed. So it's like before I start writing, everything is already up here, and then I just put everything out and that's it.
Thank you. So how many people are like this? You have less than 24 hours. You have probably less than 5 hours to produce a story. Can you raise your hand if that's you? Sure.
The issue is it depends on what it is, what kind of story it is.
Yeah.
So, in a Ghanaian media house today, every minute they want you to want the idea from, they want to bring the story. That's how it is. And you bringing that idea out will depend on your personal understanding of the issue and how fast you can move your writing. But if it is a story, a special story you are developing, then you have enough time to go out there, research, get your materials, and then go for your resources, get the information, and then come down. Most of the time, you don't have time frame for it.
Right.
Your time frame will be based on the project you are working in. But everyday story, they want you to get up from here, go out there, same story the next minute. So I want us to look at, if we want to get this right, we want us to see what aspect of storytelling we are looking at.
Yeah. Great. So thank you, sir. That's exactly why I asked the question, because I think it's imperative to acknowledge that sometimes you have to get stories out very, very quickly, and you don't have the luxury of time, and you have the pressure of answering to your boss or your colleagues to get that story out. That doesn't mean that you can't find time to decide the exact story that you want to tell. You do it because you come to the end of an article or you come to the end of a film. But how much time do you think about where that piece is going to go once you've written it? So, for example, I want to write a piece about what's something that's happened recently in the media. Levy. Okay, that's a bit political. I don't want to start an argument. Something a bit less controversial, something a bit less passionate. Okay, tidal waves. Okay, so what's your perspective on that? How do you feel about it? Have you been asked to write an article on it? No. Has anyone? No. What? Why? You're not in that region. Okay, so give me something in Accra. Right, exactly. So great. So the point I'm trying to get to is that the story is often dependent on who is telling you what to write. So if you have this, you know the exact story that you want to tell, because unless it's a special project somebody has told you, you have to find a way to take time and ask yourself, what is the angle that I want to take? Not just what does the reader want to hear, but what is the lasting effect of this article or this story going to be? Not just for the week, because it's a popular story, but in a month's time, right? So I have, Evan, you're a filmmaker. I have friends who are now writing films about Ghana's independence. And everything they're writing is coming through research. They're going through archives. They're finding articles that were written during that time. Because they were not there at the time and didn't have the lived-in experience, the entire narrative that they have is based on those articles that are written, right? There are people who are able to dispute that because they were there during the time. That the way the world is going, people are looking online for these things. So in as much as you may think that an article will only last for a week or a few days, actually, in 60 years' time, in 20 years' time, in 30 years' time, when people want to know about events that have happened, it's your stories that they're going to find on the internet. It's your stories that they're going to trust are giving an accurate representation of what happened during that time, which is why it's so important to know the story you want to tell. I'm conscious of the time that I'm taking, so I'm going to go through this very, very quickly. If you just go back for me. So these are other questions. So do you think that individuals have agency, and have you given it to them? Do you believe that they need you for survival? We rely on the media. You are the most important people, because if you are unable to spread the word, nobody cares about us, right? We've started an entire story agency at African Ingredients called Bird. And what we do, we have a relationship with Reuters, BBC, CNN, and all the larger global publication houses. And we get journalists from Africa. We pay people like you to write stories, and then we give those stories to Reuters and other agencies to pick them up. I would implore you, I will get Mercy to share my details so that you can reach out to me if it's something that you're interested in. But what we say, hello, do you have a question?
I'm actually a contributor to that.
Oh, fantastic. Hello, hi. Oh, fantastic. Great. Do you want the microphone?
Oh, no, don't worry. I'm going to charge my...
Oh, okay, great. So we have somebody here who can testify about writing for our Bird agency. But everything is about, we vet the stories, but we pay you to write the stories, and then we give them to larger organizations. The reason we do that is because we want to control the narrative that's going out. So we want to make sure that there's somebody in the middle that can say, actually, this contributes to a positive narrative about Africa, but the journalist will still get paid, right? And it will still reach global profiles. So there's a way to do it, but you just have to be very intentional about telling those stories. We're dependent on you for survival. We're dependent on you for survival, but that doesn't mean there's a need to be controversial. And then very quickly, do you have any personal experiences? If we're talking about, exactly, do you have a personal experience? Can you relate? If you can relate to that, how much does that play a part in what you're writing? Can you add compassion to your story? I don't think it's a bad story if you add compassion to it personally. Or do you think people won't like it if you're too compassionate about a subject? And lastly, do you think you have the answers to the issues? If you think you have the answers, have you put that in your writing? If you haven't put that in your writing, have you invited people to engage and put the answers in your writing as well? So how to write about Africa? Ensure that your engagements, could you please flick to the next slide for me? ensure that your engagements are respectful. When you're interviewing people, I used to work for the British Council. I was with the British Council in 2018 before I moved to Africa and Malta. So we have a lot of engagement with the press, right? I generally found that most times people were extremely respectful with the questions that they asked, mainly because of the type of organization that I work for. But then I found when I went to other events, some journalists can be very, very provocative and actually could be quite insulting in the way that they would speak to people. I don't know if it's to get a reaction or to get a story, but if you start your engagement in that way, that's the narrative that you're going to carry through your story. You know, if you start your engagement trying to be outrageous and outlandish, that is what is going to show. It's not necessary to get a good story out. It's absolutely not necessary. Although I must say I've never had that interaction because I think, not to be biased, but I think Ghanaians in general were very respectful, very honourable people. If anybody wants to prove me wrong, then feel free. Can I go to the next slide? So this is for anybody who is hiring journalists or anybody who has an intern or anybody who is looking at starting their own media publications. In your hiring process, are you fair? Is there equity? Are there more men than there are women? And you cannot tell me you have more male journalists because there are more male journalists. How intentional are you being about making sure there are no biases? Are all of your journalists in Accra from Accra? Does everybody live in airport residential? Does everybody live in Chasako? Or do you have people from different areas of the city? Do you have different ages? Is everybody, which we tend to see in Ghana, is everybody 50 up? Do you have young people in your team? How much are you doing to ensure that there is a diverse range of people so that if there is bias in your work, it can be identified? Maybe not by yourself, but other people in your team. If I write a story, I would like to share it with somebody who may be a 60-year-old man that lives in Circle, right? I'd like to share it with him to understand his perspective and to see if the story is actually what is being told, right? So in your hiring process, tackle that bias. If you notice that in your publication, in your media houses, it's predominantly male, it doesn't mean go and be contentious, but it's a question to ask. Ask yourself, why does that exist? Okay. And then in your storytelling, so once again, I think my time is running out. So in Ghana, what's an issue? Where do we see biases other than gender bias? Pardon? Okay, so we see biases maybe in ethnicities, right? So maybe we see that somebody who is Ashanti might feel a particular, pardon? No, biases. Thank you, sorry. If I'm not clear, just let me know. So somebody who maybe is an Ashanti may have negative views and biases about somebody who is Ewe, for example. So if you're writing about an Ewe politician, what are you saying? And are you writing that because actually those are the characteristics of that person? Or are you writing that because of your own bias and how you feel? If you're writing about a Conqueror, do you have an issue with him because, he's Akan or he's wealthy? Do you know what I mean? So ask yourself all of these questions, and ask yourself that before you put your stories out. There's nothing wrong with having, opinions and passion. But if you're writing from that perspective and it's not accurate, you're telling a bad story. It doesn't matter how interesting it is. And it also shows that there's a lack of emotional control on your part, which is never ever good for storytelling, unless you're writing fiction as a filmmaker. So address your own biases. If you're writing about women, I see so many articles about women, especially women in politics, which are completely misogynistic, right? And I can tell the minute I've opened it that it's written by a man. If it's written by a man, that's absolutely fine. I should be able to tell because I can see the name and see that it's a man's name. I shouldn't be able to tell because there's something attacking that person purely because of their gender. So question your biases. Question if they're necessary for the story, or if you're just adding it because you want to get something off your chest. It's not good storytelling. Ethical guidelines and informed consent. Pictures, very, very important. And this was actually written to those outside of Africa who would come to places like Ghana and take pictures of young children, or go to particular villages and you'll see pictures of like young children naked, or like just, and it's like when you're in the UK, you would never take a picture of a 3-year-old child running around naked, because if you did that, you would get arrested. So why do you feel like when you come to Africa, it's okay to do something like that? So that's exactly why we put this here. You will never put, when you're in America, you won't put videos or pictures of somebody eating off the floor or somebody sharing food. But when you come to Africa, it's okay. You know, so these are the things that we ask. Have you asked for consent? It doesn't matter if it's a 3-year-old child. Have you asked their guardian? Have you asked their mother? Have you respected their agency as an individual? Same as you, like I don't think if I see you on the street, I should be able to take a picture of you and post it on Instagram. And I know we're doing that in this world, but to be ethical, make sure you have the right consent. And like I said, this is mainly for those who are outside, specifically like white people in the global south who don't feel like they need to get consent when they come to this country. If you're working with publications that are global and are inviting people outside, it is your responsibility as a journalist to make sure that Africa is represented well. It is your responsibility as a journalist to make sure if they're doing something inappropriate, you call them out on it. It doesn't matter if it's the BBC. It doesn't matter if it's the United Nations. If somebody is doing something inappropriate, you have the responsibility to say, actually, no, this is not right. I know it's difficult, but it's possible. Everybody is on the same level. Nobody is superior to anybody. So journalists should respect each other and listen to each other's. Great, thank you. Okay, so getting to the end. Understand the local context. So we've mentioned things that have happened that aren't in Accra. Understand the local context. Speak to the community. Don't use everybody. Is everyone here from Accra? Like, as in everyone lives here? No, so you're all from different areas in the region. Fantastic. In the country, not the region. Thank you for that. So understand the context in which you're speaking and the context in which you're telling a story. That's how to be ethical. Don't step into a place and think that because you are a journalist, you have the right to speak and not listen. Very, very important. It's the same like, you know, December is coming. We're going to have an influx of people coming to Ghana, mainly to party, right? Mainly to stay in Accra. Some people will go to Kumasi. Just because they're here on holiday doesn't mean they have the onus or the agency to start speaking for everybody else, right? It annoys us, right? And I'm saying us because I've lived here for 4 years now. But it annoys us when people come and assume that they can speak on behalf of people. So when you do that as your job, make sure you're engaging the community. Okay, I'm nearly done. Invest time in your projects. We're on number 7. Great. Invest time in your project. Now I know this is difficult because we're on deadlines. The work that we're doing is intense. Use your personal time to invest time in a method and in a structure. And I don't know if in any of this other sessions someone is going to be more practical about how to split your time. Take your time to think about, in 60 years' time, somebody is going to research this project and they're going to pick up my story. Is my legacy reflecting in this article that I'm writing? You know, when I read, like I said, I'm helping my friend with a project about Ghana's independence. And I wasn't born at the time, right? When I read some of the articles, I wonder if the person knew that they were writing history as it was. I wonder if the person knew that in however many years' time, there were individuals that were going to be dependent on the stories that they're telling. So invest time in your projects. Invest time in your legacy, right? You all have a legacy as writers. You literally are responsible for history being carried on. Let that reflect. Even if it's an article about something that you think is small, it won't be small in 10 years' time. It won't be small in 20 years' time. And lastly, investing in your people. Invest in your team. Get to know the people around you. Get to know the people that you're working with. Understand power dynamics. Get to know your boss. What do they like? What don't they like? You spoke about, Sarah at the back, you spoke about sometimes you have special projects, right? If you want that special project to be really, really good, it means that your other projects have to be fantastic. So invest time in your people, the people that you engage in. Understand your audience. What does your audience want? How can you shift the narratives of your audience? And as a journalist, as a writer, how can you become a leader to your audience, right? That's also really important. Africa No Filter, without you guys, we wouldn't be able to do the work that we do. Nobody would know about it and nobody would care. So we're dependent on you. When you look at kind of, even in the entertainment circuit, I lead in arts and culture. Without media houses and media persons, we are absolutely useless, right? Our work will only go so far. So with that knowledge, how will you now navigate to make sure that your voice is as ethical as it can possibly be? So that is actually my last slide. I want to thank you all for listening to me. So for Africa No Filter, I'm just going to run you through some of the opportunities we have. So we have our birth agency, which Madame at the end said she has already been a part of. So we pay journalists to write articles, to sign up to our agency to write articles. We then basically give your articles to Reuters and other kind of big media house publications, and your name is still on our article, so we don't say that it's written by us. The reason we do that is we just want to boost the ecosystem and get more really, really good, positive African voices in, of all ages, all genders, from across the continent. We then have our media grants. So if you are a media house or organization, we give funding up to $25,000. And that can be an operational grant, so it's just the run of the operations of your organization, or it can be for a specific media project as well. And I think we're currently in the process of doing a fellows program where we'll have 12 journalists who will just work on creating content and enhancing their skills. And our fellows program comes with grants of around $5,000 for, I think it's for 12 months to write a series of stories. So I'm based in Ghana, although I work across the continent. Ghana has a strong voice. I sit in meetings and people are specific about, we want journalists from Ghana, that's specifically what we want because there's so much to write about. So I would encourage that you do get in contact with me and you can send me an email and let's keep this relationship going, and I'll be more than happy to share opportunities with you. I actually have to run after this because I have to go to another meeting. So I want to share my contact with you. So I'm going to give you my email address. So it's Jessica, JESSICA at Africa No Filter, so Africa the continent, No Filter. .org, and I don't know, Nancy, if you would like to share it again if nobody has it. Great. So if you're interested, please send me an email. I'm very, very responsive, and then we can continue the conversation from there. But I also just want to say thank you and congratulations for the work that you're doing, and thank you for listening to me. I talk a lot, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Jess. That was interesting, and I hope you learned a lot. I see so many people have questions. Can you take a few questions? Maybe just 5 minutes. Is that okay? Do you have questions?
So what kind of stories that you focus on, or you have to go just and think of anything and pitch with you? I want to know the areas, type of story that you are interested in.
Thank you, sir. It's a very good question. So we're interested in stories that are about this politician has laundered all of this money. You would then write, these young people are taking agency and they're confronting some of the injustices. So basically you're giving agency and power to Africans. So it's less about Africans are doing bad, and if Africans are doing bad, these are the people that are combating it. Then things like stories about innovation, so creative ideas that have come out of the continent, new inventions, new discoveries, new scientific discoveries, just things that are exciting and fresh. And even though they may tell of the disparities on the continent, they tell it through the light of empowerment and not through the light of rejection. Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, so writing about new innovations and other stuff. So, for example, in Ghana here, there are a lot of startups doing amazing things, but they're not getting the needed platform to get their stories out there. So, when I go, I identify somebody like that, and I go to interview the person to get to know about how they started and how they're doing now. And I share this because I know a lot of media houses in Ghana will consider that as a promotional story where they will charge for it. Are those things considered in your office?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are the things that we like, that's those are the things that we love. And for me, I lead arts and culture. So whenever I see an interesting story about an individual or a startup, I then want to find out more about them and see how we can support them. So yeah, and I know that Ghana media houses want particular stories. I know we're all in Ghana, but I would encourage you to look at how you can cross borders with the stories that you're telling and not just make Ghana your focus. How can your story reach Kenya? How can your story reach South Africa? How can your story reach Zimbabwe? Where can you put the story so that they go beyond here?
Thank you so much, Jess, and thank you everyone for the amazing questions. This will be the last question that we have taken from Sapako. Jess, thank you so much for facilitating this this session. I think we are moving on to the next session, but I just want to say these are the opportunities that we're talking about to say after this workshop, we are talking about shaping a correct narrative about internet use in Africa by young people. So after this workshop, I'm sure she has told you the kind of story that they're interested in. And these are some of the picks that you get. You have to apply, you have to look for opportunities to make sure that you get that narrative out there. So thank you so much. We'll have a chat after this. So maybe let's give a round of applause for her.
I love it.